In the heart of the known galaxy, nothing arrived by accident. The capital system of the Galactic Union was the most watched place in existence. Every trade ship was scanned. Every military vessel was tracked. Every diplomatic cruiser was cleared long before it crossed the outer defense ring. Around the great world of Valaris Prime, thousands of sensor satellites floated in perfect lines. Defense stations turned in cold silence. Patrol ships moved like blades through the dark. Nothing entered that system unseen. That was why the first report was ignored. The second report caused confusion. And the third report made the entire capital fall silent. An unknown vessel had appeared near the inner approach lanes. Not jumped in. Not requested entry. Not emerged from a registered gate. Appeared. At first, the officers inside Central Defense Command thought it was a false image caused by solar interference. That happens sometimes when the light from Valaris Prime's blue star hit the outer sensor net at the wrong angle. But this was different. The object remained in place. Then it moved slowly forward, drifting without power, turning one broken side toward the capital. When the screen sharpened, even the most experienced officers stopped speaking. The ship was human, and it looked ancient. Admiral Kieran Soule stood at the center of the command floor and stared at the image without blinking. He had spent 30 years in military service. He had seen pirate wars near the border. He had seen alien rebellions, trade blockades, and whole moons turned into fortresses. But the vessel on the screen did not look like a warship, a trader, or a colony ship. It looked like a ghost. Its hull was long and narrow, dark gray under layers of old burn marks. Sections of its outer armor were cracked open. One side of the ship looked melted, as if it had passed too close to a star. The engine ports were dead. No plasma glow. No heat trail. No active shields. No transponder signal. Yet somehow it was here. Identity, Kieran said. A young officer at the lower station swallowed hard. No live match, Admiral. No current registry. No military code. No civilian flight plan. Then how did it get through our net? We don't know, sir. That answer spread a quiet tension through the room. Kieran kept his eyes on the drifting ship. Hull age estimate. Another officer checked the scan twice before answering. At least 400 years old. Maybe more. A few people actually laughed under their breath, but not because anything was funny. It was a kind of laugh people made when truth felt impossible. For 100 years, no ship that old should still exist in open space. No ship that old should still be whole. And no ship that old should appear near the capital of the galaxy without warning. Magnify the forward hull, Kieran said. The image zoomed in. For a moment, the letters were too faded to read. Then an image program pulled contrast from the old metal. The name appeared slowly, like something waking up. HSS Aurora's Lament. The room became still. Kieran narrowed his eyes. Human liaison? A woman in a dark diplomatic uniform stepped forward from the rear station. Her name was Mara Venn, the human representative assigned to Defense Command for Emergency Contact Matters. She looked at the name, and some of the color left her face. That naming style is from the first expansion age, she said quietly. Kieran glanced at her. Explain. It was used during humanity's earliest long-range exploration era, before the Union, before modern gates, before central archives were even complete. How old? Mara kept staring at the ship. 5 centuries, maybe. Now, even Kieran felt something cold settle in his chest. Life signs, he asked. The sensor chief hesitated. Weak readings only. Very weak. But yes, sir. Kieran turned sharply. How many? Unclear at first, scanning again. The numbers rolled across the screen. Then locked. 32. That changed everything. A drifting ancient ship was one problem. An ancient drifting ship with 32 possible survivors was another. Are they alive? Kieran asked. The sensor chief looked unsure. Not in any normal sense. Metabolic readings are close to 0. They may be in cryogenic suspension. Mara spoke again, almost to herself. 500 years. Kieran heard her, but did not respond. He was already thinking several moves ahead. If the ship carried survivors, then it was not just a threat or a mystery. It was also a political event. Human worlds would demand access. The council would demand answers. The press would turn it into a system-wide storm before the next hour ended. And if the ship carried something else? He pushed that thought aside. Launch remote inspection drones. No boarding crew yet. Establish a perimeter. Full quarantine pattern. A warning light flashed above the tactical screen. Admiral, a communications officer said, voice tense. Public networks have noticed a defense movement. News channels are asking for comment. Deny nothing. Confirm nothing. Hold statement pending. Outside the wide command windows, the distant glow of Valeri's prime lit the dark. Far below, the capital city curved across the planet, like living gold. Towers rose through clouds. Orbit lanes shone with moving traffic. And above all of it, drifting closer with every second, came a ship that should have been dead before most modern species had even entered space. On the surface, the Hall of Memory had never felt so crowded. The great building stood at the center of the historian's district, made of pale stone and dark crystal, filled with records from hundreds of civilizations. Most days, it was quiet. Scholars moved softly. Archive drones hummed between shelves. The only sound were turning pages and data chimes. Not today. Today, everyone was looking at the screens. Among them stood Lore Astel, a senior historian from the Trinarchive Order. He was not human. His people were tall, thin, silver-eyed, with long hands made for delicate work. He had spent most of his life studying vanished fleets, lost migrations, and erased wars. He knew more about dead civilizations than most generals knew about living ones. And when he saw the name on the drifting vessel, his whole body tightened. He knew it. Not well, not completely, but enough. He moved quickly through rows of archive terminals and entered a restricted chamber that only senior record keepers could access. The door sealed behind him. The outside noise disappeared. He placed his hand on an old memory surface. Search, he said. A soft voice answered from the chamber itself. Please define. Loras took a slow breath. HSS Aurora's Lament. First expansion age. Human deep-range vessel. Cross-reference missing expeditions, sealed transit records, and pre-Union long-distance migration programs. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then lines of old text filled the chamber walls. Most were corrupted. Some had been deliberately erased. That was what frightened him. Many lost ships had damage records. But deliberate gaps were different. Gaps meant someone had wanted history buried. At last, one fragment stabilized. Aurora's Lament. Helios Deep Route Survey Mission. Status missing. Crew 32. Departure 497 standard years ago. Destination outer dark beyond Map Gate region. Final recorded note. Contact lost after structure event. Loras read the last two words again. Structure event. That meant nothing. Or perhaps it meant something so important that the original wording had been removed. He opened further linked records. Most were blocked. One was marked with a warning from a human archive authority nearly 4 centuries old. If any Helios vessel is ever recovered, notify Central Human Command immediately. Do not activate internal systems without protocol clearance. Loras stared at the line. Do not activate internal systems. Why would anyone write that about a lost survey ship, unless it had found something, or brought something back? Back in orbit, the first drone reached the ship. Central Defense Command watched in complete silence. The drone moved slowly along the vessel's torn side, sending clear, close images to the command screen. The ship looked even older up close. Layers of metal had buckled under stress. Impact scars covered the outer plating. Several observation ports were sealed from the inside. Thick frost clung to certain seams, even in open space. No ship survived 500 years like that by chance. Any weapons? Kieran asked. Old mount points only, said the drone officer. No active systems. Entry points. Main lock on port side. Secondary maintenance hatch near the aft spine. Both sealed. The drone moved toward the forward section. Then another voice called out from the sensor pit. Admiral, we are receiving transmission. Every head turned. Kieran said, Play it. Static flooded the command deck. At first it sounded like broken noise pulled from deep water. Then a voice formed out of it. Weak. Distorted. Human. This is survey vessel. Aurora's lament emergency drift state. If this message is received, do not wake the crew until horizon is confirmed closed. The voice crackled and vanished. Nobody moved. Kieran spoke first. Replay? The message played again. This is survey vessel. Aurora's lament emergency drift state. If this message is received, do not wake the crew until horizon is confirmed closed. Then silence. Not just quiet. Silence heavy enough to change the room. Kieran looked toward Mara. Do you know what that means? She shook her head slowly. No. Horizon, someone whispered. Close. Another officer muttered. That sounds like navigation language. No, Mara said, still staring at the waveform display. It sounded like a warning. Kieran folded his arms. An ancient ship had arrived at the capital. Its crew had been missing for 500 years. Its distress message said not to wake them, and it mentioned something called the Horizon. He had commanded fleets against real enemies. Pirates, warlords, rogue states, machines. Those things could be tracked, measured, destroyed. Mysteries were worse. Hold all boarding orders, he said. A few officers looked surprised. Sir, said the tactical chief, nothing enters that ship until we know what we are dealing with. The emergency council session began less than an hour later. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the circular chamber above the Capitol. The room was built for history. Giant screens hung between towering silver columns. Holographic stars turned slowly above the center floor. Every seat was occupied. Every translation channel was active. And every screen showed the same drifting ship. Mara Ven stood in the human delegation circle, listening as arguments rose around her. One delegate demanded destruction. Another demanded rescue. A third warned that the ship could carry ancient disease, hostile code, or unstable energy from unknown space. Mara stayed quiet until the chamber chair finally turned to her. Human representative. The chair said, "What is your government's position?" Mara felt every eye in the hall settle on her. For a moment, she wished she had an answer. She did not. Human Central Command had sent only one message so far, and it was deeply unhelpful. Confirm vessel identity. Prevent unauthorized boarding. Await further orders. That was all. No explanation. No history. No comfort. It meant one thing clearly. The human government knew more than it was saying. Our position, Mara said carefully, is that the vessel must be secured, not destroyed. There are 32 possible survivors aboard. A harsh voice came from the Velker military block. Survivors from 500 years ago. If cryogenic suspension held, yes. And if they wake carrying whatever secret message told them to stay asleep, the chamber filled with low voices. Mara answered with calm she did not fully feel. Then all the more reason not to act in panic. But inside, she was unsettled. She had already searched the human diplomatic archives on her private channel. Most references to the Helios missions were gone. Not missing in the normal sense. Removed. That almost never happened without high-level order. It meant the drifting ship was not just a lost vessel. It was a sealed chapter of human history. And now it had returned in front of the entire galaxy. In the Hall of Memory, Lord Astel had gone deeper. He found an older file, fragmented and damaged, attached to a witness report from a long-dead freight captain who had once seen the Aurora's lament depart. Most of the text was unreadable, but one sentence remained. The humans said they were not searching for planets. They were searching for the place between roads. Loras read it twice. The place between roads. That was not colony language, not survey language, not even military language. That was a language of people chasing something they did not fully understand. A sound came from his terminal. A new file had opened automatically from a locked chain. The text on screen was brief. Recovered Helios fragments indicate contact with non-gate transit architecture. Loras stared. His mouth went dry. Non-gate transit architecture. Not built by humans. Not built by any modern Union species. Something old. Something larger than known travel systems. something that could connect places without known gates. Suddenly the ship in orbit seemed much more dangerous, not because it carried weapons, because it might carry a map or a key. He turned toward the chamber door at the exact moment his terminal flashed red. A new alert had gone system-wide. Unusual gravitational pattern detected behind unidentified vessel. Loras was already running before he finished reading. Back on the defense deck, the lights dimmed as long-range scanners shifted focus. Kieran stood at the main screen, behind the drifting Aurora's lament, deep in the dark approach vector from which it had come. Space looked wrong. At first it appeared as a shimmer, then as a bend in the stars. Then, for less than a second, as the faint outline of something vast and circular, half-seen and impossible. It was not a ship. It was too large, too thin, too perfect. A ring, or the shadow of a ring. Then it was gone. Distance? Kieran demanded. Unknown. Readings unstable. Energy profile? No match in defense archives. Can it be tracked? Not continuously. It appears and vanishes between scan pulses. Mara stepped closer to the screen, her face pale. That's what the message meant. Kieran looked at her. The horizon? She did not answer immediately, because in that moment, another signal came from the ancient ship. This one stronger. This one live. Static burst across the speakers, and then a human voice spoke in a whisper, so we could almost sound it dead. They found us. Every person on the command deck froze. The voice continued, breaking with pain and age and frozen sleep. If you can hear this, do not let the ring open. Then the channel died, and behind the drifting ship, in the black between stars, the faint circular distortion began to grow. For several long seconds after the message ended, nobody on the command deck spoke. The last words of the unknown voice still echoed in the quiet room. Do not let the ring open. Admiral Kieran Soule stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The faint distortion behind the drifting ship was still there, barely visible. It looked like space itself had been bent into a thin circle far in the distance. A ring, or the shadow of one. Scan again, Kieran ordered. The sensor team immediately began new sweeps, running multi-spectrum analysis, gravitational mapping, dark energy sweep. Numbers filled the displays. But the answers were not helpful. It's unstable, the sensor chief said. The structure appears only for fractions of a second between scans. Distance? Still unclear. Possibly millions of kilometers behind the ship. But the energy readings are strange. How strange? The officer hesitated before answering. Admiral, the energy pattern is similar to gate technology. That got everyone's attention. Gate technology was the backbone of the galaxy. Massive stargates connected hundreds of systems. Trade, travel, and entire civilizations depended on them. But those gates were massive structures, carefully built and carefully controlled. What appeared on the screen now was different. There was no visible station, no control hub, no known construction pattern, just a faint ring shape forming in empty space. Mara Venn stepped closer to the display. That's impossible, she whispered. Kieran looked at her. Explain. Mara shook her head slowly. Union gates are stable, fixed structures. They require huge stations and power grids. You can't just open one in empty space. Unless, one officer said quietly, someone found another way. Kieran did not like that idea. Focus on the ship, he said firmly. That vessel brought this here. I want everything we can learn about it. The drone that had been circling the ship slowly moved closer to the main hull. The camera zoomed toward a cracked observation window. Inside, darkness filled the chamber. But then the drone light reached deeper. Rows of metal pods appeared in the shadows. Cryogenic pods. 32 of them, each one sealed, each one covered with frost. Inside them were human figures. Still, silent, waiting. The entire command deck watched the image in silence. 500 years. Those people had been asleep for 500 years. How are the systems still working? Someone asked. Minimal power, the sensor chief said. The ship has a small fusion core still running. It's barely alive. Enough to keep them frozen, Mara said softly. Kieran folded his arms. If we wake them, what happens? Mara looked at the screen. We get answers. Far below on Valeri's prime, the council chamber had become louder. The news of the strange ring behind the ship had spread quickly. Delegates were shouting across the chamber. Military representatives demanded action. Scientists demanded caution. Trade representatives demanded the system reopen. And several religious leaders from distant worlds had begun whispering about ancient structures beyond the stars. The council chair raised a hand for silence. Order. We will have order. Slowly the room quieted. Admiral Soul, the chair said, activating the communication link, report the situation. The image of the defense command deck appeared above the center of the chamber. Kieran's voice was calm. An unidentified structure is forming behind a vessel known as Aurora's Lament. Its energy pattern is similar to gate technology, but not identical. Murmurs filled the chamber. Is it dangerous? The chair asked. We do not know yet. A representative from the Velker Alliance stood quickly. Destroy the ship, now, before the structure grows. Mara Ven immediately stepped forward in the chamber. No, the Velker delegate glared at her. You cannot seriously suggest allowing that vessel to remain. It carries 32 people, Mara replied. Human citizens. 500-year-old corpses. They are alive. Barely. Mara's voice remained steady. If the ship is destroyed, the galaxy will never know what happened out there. We will never know what that structure is. Another council member spoke. And if the ship is the key to activating it? That question silenced the chamber, because everyone had been thinking it. The chair turned back to the screen. Admiral Soul, can the vessel be moved away from the capital? Kieran considered the idea. It has no working engines, but a tractor fleet might be able to tow it, then do so immediately. Before Kieran could respond, a new alarm sounded in the command deck. The sensor officer spoke quickly. Admiral, the ring structure just grew larger. Every screen updated. The faint distortion had expanded. Now it was clearly visible. A massive circular outline stretching across the dark. Still incomplete. Still flickering. But growing. Inside the Hall of Memory, historian Lorastel rushed through the archive corridors. His hands trembled slightly as he held the data slate. The information he had found was frightening. Not because it was clear, but because it was incomplete. Helios missions, lost ships, references to something called the place between roads. And now a ring was forming in space. When he reached the transit elevator, a security officer stopped him. Restricted access above this level. I must reach Defense Command, Loras said. Purpose. Loras lifted the slate. Historical emergency. The officer scanned the authorization seal of the archive order. After a moment, the elevator doors opened. As the lift began rising toward Orbit Command, Loras stared at the information again. One more fragment had appeared in the database. A damage log entry from the Aurora's Lament itself. He read the surviving line slowly. Day 184. We have found the structure. It is not a gate. It is a door. Day 186. The door responds to movement through space. It follows us. Day 190. We believe the door connects to somewhere beyond map reality. Day 191. We must close the horizon. Loras felt cold. The door followed them. That meant the ship had not just discovered the structure. It had brought it with them. Back on the command deck, tension was growing. The ring in space was now clearly visible even without enhancement. A faint silver arc stretched across the stars behind the drifting ship. Not solid, not fully real, but growing more stable. Energy output rising. The sensor officer reported. Rate. Kieran asked. Slow but steady. Estimate until full formation? The officer checked the projections. Unknown. Could be hours. Could be minutes. Kieran turned to Mara. What happens if it opens? She shook her head. No one knows. But the message said not to let it open. Yes. Kieran watched the drifting ship again. 32 people inside. 5 centuries asleep. And one warning. He made a decision. Prepare boarding team. Several officers looked surprised. Sir, the tactical chief said, we need answers before that ring finishes forming. The drone moved closer to the maintenance hatch on the side of the ship. Cutting lasers activated. The frozen metal slowly melted open. Inside the hatch, darkness waited. Kieran turned to the boarding leader on the command deck. Commander Rhea Tao, you and your team will enter the vessel, secure the cryo chamber, and locate the source of the distress messages. Yes, Admiral. Be careful. Rhea nodded once. Within minutes, a small boarding craft launched from the defense station. It crossed the empty space between the capital fleet and the drifting ancient ship. Thousands of eyes across the galaxy were watching now. News networks, council worlds, human colonies, even distant systems had begun tuning into the broadcast because everyone understood something important was happening. The boarding craft reached the hull. Magnetic clamps locked. The airlock opened. Commander Rhea Tao stepped inside first. Her helmet light cut through the darkness. The interior looked exactly as the outside suggested. Old, dusty, frozen. Ancient control panels filled the walls. Strange navigation displays from an era before modern star charts. And everywhere there were signs of damage. Rhea moved slowly through the corridor with her team behind her. Atmosphere? Thin but breathable. One soldier reported. Power? Minimal systems only. They reached the central chamber. The cryogenic pods stood in long rows. 32 frozen people. 500 years asleep. Rhea walked toward the nearest pod. A name was printed on the metal plate. Captain Elias Ward. The pod suddenly beeped. A small light blinked. Rhea froze. Did you activate something? She asked. No, one of the soldiers replied. Another pod lit up. Then another. Across the chamber, multiple cryopods began blinking. Systems that had been silent for centuries were waking. Back on the command deck, alarm sounded. Admiral, the sensor chief shouted. The ring just stabilized another 10%. At the same moment, Commander Rhea's voice came through the comm. Admiral, I think the crew is waking up. Kieran looked at the growing ring in space, then back at the ship, then at the blinking life signs on the screen. And deep inside the frozen vessel, one cryogenic pod slowly opened. A man inside took his first breath in 500 years. And the first thing he said was, "We're too late." Inside the frozen chamber of the Aurora's lament, Commander Rhea Tao stood perfectly still. The cryogenic pod in front of her had opened with a slow mechanical hiss. Frost rolled across the floor like cold fog. The man inside the pod struggled to breathe, his chest rising and falling rapidly as ancient life support systems struggled to adjust to a new time. Captain Elias Ward had been asleep for 500 years, and now he was awake. The man's eyes opened slowly. They were unfocused at first, like someone waking from a deep dream. His skin was pale. His hair was covered in frost. His muscles trembled as the body tried to remember how to move again. Rhea raised a hand carefully. "Don't move too fast," she said calmly through her helmet speaker. "Your body has been in suspension for a very long time." Ward looked at her helmet light. His voice was weak. "Where are we?" "Orbit of Valeri's Prime. Capital of the Galactic Union." The man blinked slowly. Confusion crossed his face. "The capital?" Then his expression changed suddenly. Memory returned like a storm. Ward forced himself upright, gripping the edge of the cryopod. "No," he whispered. Rhea stepped closer. "Captain, you need to remain calm." Ward ignored her. His eyes moved quickly across the chamber, counting the other pods. "How long?" he asked. 500 years, Rhea said. The words hit him like physical force. Ward leaned against the pod wall, breathing heavily. Then he looked at Rhea again. "The ring," he said. Rhea exchanged a quick glance with her team. "What ring?" she asked. Ward grabbed her arm suddenly, surprising everyone. "The Horizon Ring. Is it here?" Rhea did not answer immediately. Instead, she activated her comm. "Admiral, the first survivor is conscious." On the command deck, Admiral Kieran leaned closer to the display. "Put him on audio." Rhea nodded and turned back to Ward. "Captain, you need to listen carefully. A ring-shaped structure has appeared behind your ship. Ward's face drained of color. How far behind us? Unknown distance. Ward closed his eyes for a moment. Then it followed us. The command deck fell silent again. Kieran spoke slowly. Captain Ward, I need you to explain what that ring is. Ward looked around the chamber. Many cryopods were still closed. A few had begun slowly waking their occupants. The old captain took a deep breath. It's not a gate, he said. Then what is it? Kieran asked. Ward answered quietly. A door. 500 years earlier, the crew of the Aurora's Lament had been explorers. Humanity was still young in the stars back then. The galaxy was not yet mapped. Most travel happened through long-distance jump drives. Stargates existed, but only in a few central regions. Beyond the known routes was a vast area of space that explorers called the Dark Expanse. No signals came from there. No civilizations were found there, but strange readings sometimes appeared on long-range scans. The Helios program had been created to explore that unknown region. Ward and his crew were one of the first ships sent into it. At first, the mission had been ordinary. New stars, dead planets, empty space. Then they found the structure. Ward's voice trembled slightly as he remembered. It appeared between star systems, not orbiting anything, just floating in deep space. How large? Kieran asked. Bigger than anything humanity had ever built. The command deck officers exchanged nervous looks. Ward continued. It was a perfect ring, thousands of kilometers wide, made from material we couldn't identify. It had no engines, no signals, no power source we could detect. Did you try to enter it? Mara asked. Ward nodded slowly. Yes. Ria's team looked at each other. What happened? She asked. Ward stared at the floor for a moment. Nothing at first. The Aurora's Lament had passed through the center of the ring. For several seconds, the sensors showed nothing unusual. No energy, no change in space, no movement. But when they exited the other side, the navigation systems began reporting impossible readings. Distances no longer matched the star maps. Signals from the previous system vanished. It was as if the ship had stepped outside the normal structure of space. Ward's voice grew quieter. We had entered a region where the stars did not behave normally. Another galaxy? Kieran asked. Ward shook his head. No. His eyes lifted slowly. Somewhere between places. The command deck remained silent. Ward continued. The ring wasn't a gateway like our star gates. It was a passage to a layer of space that exists outside normal routes. Why would something like that exist? Mara asked. Ward gave a weak smile. We asked the same question. Inside that strange region, the crew had seen things that no explorer had ever recorded before. Star systems that were half visible, gravity patterns that shifted without warning, objects that seemed older than any known civilization. It was a region that connected different parts of the galaxy in ways normal space could not. A hidden network, a place between roads. But it was not empty. Ward's voice grew tense again. After 2 days inside that region, we detected something moving. What kind of object? Kieran asked. Ward swallowed. At first we thought it was debris. Then we realized it was watching us. The room grew colder. Watching. Rhea repeated. Yes. Ward's eyes were distant now. It followed our ship through the shadows between stars. It never attacked. It never sent signals. But every time we changed course, it changed with us. What was it? Mara asked. Ward shook his head slowly. We never got a clear scan. It was enormous. The command deck officers shifted uneasily. Why did you leave the region? Kieran asked. Ward's voice dropped. Because we realized something terrifying. What? The ring had opened when we passed through it. So, Ward looked directly at the camera, and it never closed. Back in the present, the command deck was completely silent. Ward continued speaking slowly, each word heavy with memory. That place between roads, it was not meant for normal space travel. The ring we used was only one door among many. And the doors stay open? Kieran asked. Ward nodded. Yes. Rhea understood the problem immediately. If one stays open, Something else can come through. Ward met her eyes. Yes. On the main screen behind the command deck, the faint ring behind the ship grew slightly brighter. Its shape was becoming more stable, more real. How did you escape? Mara asked. Ward answered quietly. We ran. The Aurora's lament had fled through the strange region as fast as its engines could carry it, but the massive object following them never stopped. It did not attack. It did not communicate. It simply followed, always behind them, watching, waiting. We realized something terrible, Ward said. What? Kieran asked. Ward's voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't chasing us. The command deck waited. Ward finished the sentence slowly. It was following the open door. When the crew finally escaped back into normal space, the ring followed them. The passage had attached itself to the ship's travel path. Wherever the ship moved, the ring slowly formed again behind it, a door between two realities. The crew tried everything to close it. Engine bursts, radiation blasts, navigation reversals. Nothing worked. The door remained open, so the crew made a final decision. We shut down the engines, Ward said. We placed the entire crew into cryogenic sleep, and we sent the ship drifting. Rhea understood. You hoped the ring would eventually collapse on its own. Ward nodded. If the ship stopped moving, the door would stop forming. Did it work? Kieran asked. Ward closed his eyes briefly. For a while. The command deck turned to the main display again. The ring was now clearly visible. Its faint silver structure stretched across the stars. Ward looked up at it on the screen. His face became pale. It's stabilizing again. Why? Mara asked. Ward slowly turned toward the camera. Because someone woke us up. The entire command deck froze. At that moment, another cryogenic pod opened inside the ship. Then another, and another. Life signs began increasing across the chamber. 32 survivors were waking. The ancient ship was coming back to life. And behind it, the impossible ring continued to grow. Ward spoke one final sentence. If the door finishes opening. He paused, then finished quietly. Something will come through. At that exact moment, the center of the distant ring flickered. For a brief second, something enormous moved on the other side. Something watching. And it had just noticed the capital of the galaxy. The command deck of Central Defense Command had never been so quiet. Every officer stared at the massive screen, showing the growing ring behind the Aurora's lament. The faint silver structure now stretched across thousands of kilometers of empty space. It was no longer just a distortion. It was becoming real. Admiral Kieran Sol felt the pressure of the moment like weight on his chest. 500 years ago, a human exploration ship had discovered something beyond the known map of the galaxy, a door between realities. And now that door was opening again. Energy levels? Kieran asked. The sensor chief answered quickly. Rising steadily, Admiral. The ring is stabilizing. How long before it fully opens? The officer hesitated. Possibly less than 1 hour. A low murmur spread across the deck. 1 hour. If the captain's warning was correct, then something might come through that door before the hour ended. Kieran looked toward the image of Captain Ward, still sitting weakly beside his cryogenic pod inside the ancient ship. Captain, he said, is there any way to close the door? Ward shook his head slowly. Not from inside the ring. What about from the outside? Ward was silent for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. There might be one way. The entire command deck leaned forward. When we first discovered the structure, Ward said, our scientists believed the ring responded to movement through space. It formed along our travel path. So if the ship stops moving, Kieran said, the ring stops forming. Kieran nodded. That explains why the door stayed weak while your ship drifted. Yes. But now that you're awake, the ship systems are activating again. Ward nodded, which means the door is rebuilding. Kieran crossed his arms. Then we shut the ship down. Ward looked up sharply. It's not that simple. Why not? Ward pointed weakly toward the cryogenic chamber. My crew is waking up. Life support systems are restarting. If you cut all power now, they die. Mara finished quietly. Ward nodded. Silence returned to the command deck. 32 people had survived 5 centuries in frozen sleep, but if the ship lost power now, they would all die within minutes. At the same time, if the ship remained active, the door behind it would continue to open. It was a terrible choice. Kieran turned to the tactical officer. Update from the ring. The officer swallowed. Admiral, we're detecting movement inside the structure. The entire room froze. Show me. The screen zoomed toward the center of the growing ring. For several seconds there was nothing. Then a shadow passed across the inner surface. It moved slowly, enormous, and very far away. Someone on the command deck whispered, "That's not debris." The shape appeared again. A long, dark form sliding behind thin silver edge of the ring. Watching, waiting. Whatever existed on the other side of the door had just become aware of the galaxy beyond it. On the surface of Valeri's Prime, panic was beginning to spread. The council chamber had turned chaotic. Delegates argued loudly across the great circular hall. Security officers tried to maintain order, but fear was stronger than rules. The massive ring in orbit was now visible through the upper sky windows, a faint circle glowing against the stars. News channels across hundreds of systems were broadcasting live images of it. Some people believed it was an ancient alien structure. Others believed it was a weapon. Religious groups on distant worlds were already calling it a divine portal. The council chair struck the central platform of the staff. Silence. The chamber slowly quieted. "We must act together," the chair said firmly. "The capital system cannot become the center of an uncontrolled cosmic event." A military delegate stood immediately. "Destroy the ship." Several voices agreed. Mara Venn stood from the human delegation seat. "No." The Velker representative glared at her. "If that vessel is the key to opening the door, then removing it will stop the process. Or accelerate it," Mara replied. The chamber murmured again. "Explain," the chair said. Mara stepped into the center of the floor. Captain Ward explained that the door formed along the ship's path through space. If the ship is destroyed suddenly, the energy field might collapse violently. And, the Velker delegate asked impatiently, and that collapse would happen inside the capital system. Now the chamber grew quiet again. No one wanted an unknown interdimensional structure exploding above the most populated world in the galaxy. "Then what do you suggest?" the chair asked. Mara answered slowly. "We move the ship." Back in orbit, Admiral Kieran was already considering the same idea. "Prepare tractor fleet," he ordered. The tactical officer looked surprised. "Admiral, if the ring follows the ship's movement, then we move the ship away from the capital." "Where?" Kieran looked at the star map. Beyond the capital system was a region of empty space known as the Outer Quiet Zone. No colonies, no trade routes, nothing but distant stars. "Tow the ship toward the Quiet Zone," Kieran said. The command deck began moving quickly. Orders spread across the defense fleet. Massive tractor ships began launching from nearby stations. If they could move the ancient vessel far enough away, the door would open in empty space instead of above a populated world. But there was one problem. The ring was still growing, and something inside it was moving closer. Inside the Aurora's Lament, Commander Riatal helped Captain Ward stand. The old explorer was still weak from centuries of frozen sleep, but his mind was sharp. More cryogenic pods had opened around them. Confused survivors slowly stepped out into the cold chamber. A woman with short gray hair looked around in disbelief. "How long were we under?" she asked. Ward answered quietly, 500 years. The crew stared at him in shock. One man laughed nervously. "That's not possible." Ward pointed toward the wall display, showing the growing ring outside. "That is..." The crew gathered around the screen. Several of them froze. One whispered, "It followed us." Ward nodded. "Yes." Another crew member spoke quickly. "Then we must close the horizon." Rhea turned toward them. "How?" The woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Lena Harrow, Chief Physics Officer of this mission." She pointed toward the ship's main engineering core. "The ring reacts to movement through space. That means it's connected to the ship's navigation signature." Rhea frowned. You mean the ship itself is acting like a beacon? Yes. Then we shut the beacon down. Harrow shook her head. That would kill everyone here. Ward spoke quietly. There's another way. Everyone looked at him. Ward continued. We reversed the original path. What do you mean? Rhea asked. Ward pointed toward the distant ring. We send the ship back through the door. The room fell silent. Back through the door. Back into the strange region between stars. Rhea shook her head. That place nearly destroyed your mission. Ward nodded. Yes. He looked toward the screen again. But if we don't go back, whatever is following that door will come here instead. Back on the command deck, the tractor ships had reached the drifting vessel. Powerful beams of controlled gravity locked onto the hull. Slowly, carefully, the ancient ship began to move. The massive ring behind it shifted slightly. The structure responded immediately. Movement confirmed, the sensor chief reported. Is the ring following? Kieran asked. Yes, but slowly. That was good news. If the ship moved faster than the ring could form, the door might weaken again. But the celebration lasted only seconds. A new alert appeared on the screen. Admiral energy surge inside the ring. The image zoomed again. Something enormous moved through the shadowed interior. Closer now, much closer. The shape was impossible to measure. Long, smooth, almost organic. It moved slowly across the inner surface of the ring, like a creature circling a doorway. Then, for a brief second, a single glowing shape appeared inside the darkness. An eye, not mechanical, not artificial, alive, and it was looking directly toward the capital system. The command deck felt colder than space. Admiral, the sensor officer whispered, that thing knows we're here. Kieran stared at the screen. For the first time in decades of service, he truly did not know what he was facing. Behind the drifting ship, the impossible door between realities continued to open, and whatever lived beyond it had just seen the galaxy. The capital system had never experienced fear like this before. From the shining towers of Valeri's Prime to the outer defense stations drifting in cold orbit, every sensor and telescope was focused on the same terrifying sight. Behind the drifting human ship, the massive ring in space was growing stronger, and something enormous was moving inside it. The creature behind the door was no longer hiding. Each time the ring flickered, the shadow inside moved closer to the opening. Its shape stretched across thousands of kilometers of dark space. No one could see its full form, only parts of it sliding across the inner surface of the ring like a living storm. And the worst part was this. It was getting closer. On the command deck, Admiral Kieran Soule stood with both hands resting on the tactical table. The room was quiet again. Too quiet. Every officer knew that whatever lived behind that door was not something their weapons had been designed to fight. Status of the towing operation? Kieran asked. The tactical officer answered immediately. The tractor fleet is moving the Aurora's Lament toward the outer quiet zone, Admiral. Speed is limited to prevent hull damage. How far from the capital? 200,000 kilometers and increasing. Kieran nodded slowly. That distance was good, but not enough. If the ring fully opened now, the entire capital system would still be within range of whatever came through. Ring stability? He asked. The sensor chief looked at the numbers again. 60% formed and still increasing. A low murmur passed through the deck. 60%. They were running out of time. At that moment, Commander Rhea Tao's voice came through the communication channel from inside the ancient ship. Admiral, Captain Ward and his crew have a proposal. Kieran looked toward the screen. Let's hear it. The image switched to the cryogenic chamber aboard the Aurora's Lament. Captain Ward stood beside Dr. Lena Harrow, the mission's former physics officer. Several other survivors had gathered around the old control consoles, studying the ship's systems. Ward looked directly into the camera. Admiral, we believe we can close the door. Every officer on the command deck leaned forward. How? Kieran asked. Ward stepped aside slightly so Harrow could speak. The scientist's voice was still weak from long sleep, but her mind was clear. The door is tied to the ship's original travel path. When we passed through the ring 500 years ago, the door anchored itself to our navigation signature. Meaning? Kieran asked. It means the ring follows us. Yes, we understand that part. Harrow nodded. But there's more. The ring isn't just following our location. It's following the direction of our original journey. Kieran frowned. You mean the door still expects you to continue traveling forward? Yes. And if you do? Harrow looked toward the distant ring on the display. The door will fully open. That was not good news. But if we reverse our course, she continued, the door should begin collapsing instead. The command deck was silent. Kieran thought carefully before speaking. You want to fly the ship back toward the ring? Ward nodded. Yes. Several officers on the command deck looked shocked. You're suggesting we send you directly toward that thing, the tactical chief said. Ward did not argue. Yes. Kieran leaned closer to the screen. And you believe that will close the door? Harrow answered. We believe it will force the doorway to fold back into the region it came from. Kieran crossed his arms. And if you're wrong, Ward answered calmly, then the door will open completely, and we will be the first thing it reaches. Inside the council chamber on Valeri's Prime, the debate had reached its peak. News of the enormous creature inside the ring had spread quickly. Panic was now spreading across several member worlds. Some systems were already preparing evacuation fleets. Others demanded the Capital Defense Fleet destroy the ship immediately. The council chair raised his voice again. Order! The chamber slowly quieted. We have received a proposal from Admiral Sol, the chair said. A holographic image of the Aurora's lament appeared above the chamber. The surviving crew believe the door can be closed by reversing the ship's path. A representative from the Velcro Alliance stood immediately. You mean flying directly into the anomaly? Yes. That is suicide. The chamber filled with agreement. Mara Ven stood quietly among the human delegation. She had already heard the plan from Admiral Sol before the meeting began, and she understood something many others did not. The crew of the Aurora's Lament had already spent 500 years trying to protect the galaxy from what they discovered. Now, they were ready to do it again. The chair turned toward Mara. Does humanity support this plan? Mara looked around the chamber. Then she answered calmly. Yes. The chamber erupted again. You cannot seriously allow those people to sacrifice themselves. They are not being forced, Mara said. They are choosing. The chair looked troubled. And if they fail? Mara did not hesitate. Then at least someone tried to close the door. Back in orbit, Admiral Kieran faced the most difficult decision of his career. The plan was simple. The Aurora's Lament would detach from the tractor fleet and ignite its engines. It would fly directly toward the growing ring. If Dr. Harrow's theory was correct, reversing the ship's path would force the doorway to collapse. But if she was wrong, the door would open completely, and whatever lived on the other side would enter the galaxy. Kieran activated the communication channel again. Captain Ward. The old explorer looked up. Yes, Admiral? You understand the risk. Ward smiled faintly. I understood the risk the day we first found the ring. Kieran nodded slowly. Then I will clear the path. Moments later, the tractor fleet released the ancient ship. For the first time in 5 centuries, the engines of the Aurora's Lament began to wake. Inside the engineering section, the surviving crew worked quickly. Old control systems flickered back to life. The fusion core slowly increased power. The ship trembled slightly as the engines warmed. Commander Rietau watched from the bridge. You're really doing this, she said. Ward sat in the captain's chair, staring at the growing ring ahead of them. Yes. Dr. Harrow stood beside the navigation console. The door is already 70% stable, she said quietly. We have maybe 20 minutes. Ward nodded. That's enough. Outside the ship, the massive ring now filled half the sky. The creature inside moved closer to the opening. For a brief moment, part of its body passed through the edge of the doorway. It looked like living darkness. Long, smooth, covered in shifting light. Every defense station in the capital system opened fire instinctively. Energy beams struck the edge of the ring. They passed through harmlessly. The creature did not even react. It was too large, too distant, too alien. The galaxy had never faced something like this. On the command deck, Admiral Kieran watched the ancient ship ignite its engines. The Aurora's lament slowly turned. Instead of moving away from the door, it began flying directly toward it. "Godspeed," Kieran whispered. Inside the ship, Captain Ward looked at his crew. Some of them were still weak from cryo-sleep. Some were terrified, but none of them tried to stop the plan, because they all remembered what they had seen 500 years ago. The place between roads. The silent watcher that followed them. The door that refused to close. Ward took a slow breath. "Helm," he said. "Full forward." The engines roared. For the first time in 5 centuries, the Aurora's lament surged through space with purpose. The ship flew straight toward the massive ring, toward the door between realities, and toward the enormous creature waiting inside. Behind them, the capital system watched in silence. The fate of the galaxy now depended on a ship that should have died 500 years ago, and a crew that had already sacrificed their entire lives once. As the ship crossed the final distance toward the ring, Dr. Harrow's voice echoed through the bridge. "The door is reacting." Outside the window, the silver structure began to tremble. Energy waves rippled across its surface. For the first time since it appeared, the ring started to change. But the creature inside it moved faster, much faster. It was rushing toward the opening now, toward the galaxy, toward the ship, and toward the final moment that would decide everything. Across the capital system, millions of people were watching the same moment. High above the glowing world of Valeri's Prime, the ancient ship Aurora's Lament raced through the dark toward the impossible ring in space. The silver circle now stretched across the stars like a doorway to another universe. Its edges flickered with strange energy that no scientist in the galaxy could fully understand. And inside it, something enormous was moving. The creature from the place between roads was coming closer. On the command deck of Central Defense Command, Admiral Kieran Soule stood motionless as he watched the tactical display. The tiny marker representing the human ship was moving fast now, straight toward the ring. "Distance?" Kieran asked quietly. The sensor officer answered without looking away from the screen. 30,000 kilometers. The entire command deck was silent. Everyone understood what this meant. In less than 2 minutes, the Aurora's Lament would reach the doorway between realities. And if Dr. Harrow's theory was wrong, the door would fully open. Inside the old ship, the bridge lights glowed dimly. Most of the systems were barely functioning. Ancient control panels flickered as the engines pushed harder than they had in centuries. Captain Elias Ward sat in the command chair. His hands were steady. 500 years earlier, he had led this ship into the unknown. Now he was leading it back. Dr. Lena Harrow stood beside the navigation console, studying the strange energy readings coming from a ring. "It's reacting," she said. "How?" Ward asked. "The structure is trying to stabilize the opening, but our reverse course is interfering with the process." Ward allowed himself a small breath of hope. "That means the plan is working." "Maybe," Harrow said carefully. Ward turned slightly. That did not sound very confident. Harrow looked up at the growing ring outside the window. "Because the creature is also reacting." Everyone on the bridge turned toward the forward display. The massive shape inside the ring was moving faster now, much faster. It was no longer circling the doorway. It was charging toward it, toward the galaxy. Back in the capital system, the defense fleet had formed a massive line between the ring and the planet. Hundreds of warships floated in formation. Their weapons were fully powered. But every commander knew the truth. Their weapons might not matter. The creature inside the ring was simply too large. "Admiral," the tactical officer said quietly, "we are detecting movement beyond the ring." "How close is it?" Kieran asked. "Very close." The screen zoomed in again. The enormous shadow was almost at the edge of the doorway. Its shape was clearer now. It looked like a living ribbon of darkness stretching across space. Its body moved slowly but powerfully, like something that had existed for millions of years in a place where normal space did not exist. Then the creature's head reached the edge of the ring. For the first time, it looked into the galaxy, and it saw everything: the capital world, the defense fleet, and the small human ship flying directly toward it. Inside the Aurora's Lament, alarms began sounding. Energy spike. Harrow shouted. Ward leaned forward. What kind? The ring is trying to fully open. The bridge shook slightly as waves of strange gravity passed across the ship. Outside the window, the silver circle began glowing brighter. The door between realities was almost complete. Distance to the ring? Ward asked. 10,000 kilometers. Ward nodded once. Maintain course. Commander Rhea Tao stood behind him. You're not slowing down? No. Rhea understood. If the ship stopped now, the ring would stabilize completely. The only chance was to continue forward, to reverse the original path that opened the door 500 years ago. Harrow suddenly shouted. The collapse is starting. Ward looked at the screen. The outer edges of the ring were shaking violently. Thin cracks of dark energy spread across its surface like lightning. But at the same time, the creature inside the doorway moved faster. Much faster. It was almost through. On the command deck, Admiral Kieran watched the impossible scene unfold. The ancient human ship was racing toward the massive door. The creature was racing toward the galaxy. Both were seconds away from reaching the same point. Time to impact. Kieran asked. 30 seconds. The entire deck held its breath. Inside the Aurora's Lament, Ward looked at his crew. 500 years ago, they had tried to protect the galaxy. Today, they would finish the job. Helm, he said quietly. Yes, Captain. Maximum engine output. The engines roared louder. The ship surged forward. Outside the window, the massive ring now filled the entire view. The creature's enormous head pushed through the opening. Its body stretched endlessly behind it. It was not attacking. It was simply entering a new world. A world that did not belong to it. Ward spoke calmly. Hold course. The final seconds arrived. The Aurora's Lament crossed the edge of the ring. The moment it passed through the doorway, the structure reacted violently. The ring twisted. Energy exploded across its surface. Dr. Harrow shouted. The path reversal is complete. Outside, the door began folding inward. The ring was collapsing. The creature reacted immediately. It tried to pull itself back, but the doorway was already shrinking. The ancient ship flew deeper into the strange region between realities. Inside the capital system, the defense fleet watched in silence. The massive ring trembled again. Then it began to close, slowly at first, then faster. The enormous creature struggled against the collapsing doorway. Half of its body was still outside the ring. Half remained trapped inside. The structure shrank rapidly. Space itself seemed to twist around it. Then, with one final flash of light, the ring vanished, the doorway closed, and the creature disappeared with it. Silence returned to the capital system. The stars looked normal again. The empty space behind the defense fleet was calm. No ring, no creature, no doorway between realities. On the command deck, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, the sensor officer whispered, "The anomaly is gone." Admiral Kieran's soul slowly exhaled. "What about the ship?" he asked. The sensor scanned the area again. Nothing. No signal. No wreckage. No trace. The Aurora's Lament had vanished with the collapsing doorway. Captain Ward and his crew had flown back into the place between roads, and the door behind them had closed forever. Hours later, the council chamber on Valeri's Prime was quiet. The galaxy had been saved, but the cost was heavy. 32 explorers who had already lost 5 centuries of their lives had given everything to protect a future they would never see. Mara Venn stood quietly near the chamber window. The stars above the capital looked peaceful again. The council chair approached her. "They saved us all," he said softly. Mara nodded. "Yes." The chair looked up at the sky. "Do you think we will ever see them again?" Mara thought for a moment. Then she smiled slightly. "Explorers like them rarely stay lost forever. Far beyond the known galaxy, in a silent region between stars and shadows, a small human ship drifted through a strange sea of light. The crew of the Aurora's Lament looked out a universe that did not follow normal rules. Captain Ward sat in the command chair. The door behind them was gone. The creature was gone. The galaxy was safe. Dr. Harrow checked the instruments and smiled faintly. The doorway collapsed completely. Ward nodded. Good. Rhea Tao looked at the strange stars outside. So what happens now? Ward leaned back slowly. 500 years earlier, they had been explorers. Now they were something else. Guardians of a hidden road no one else could reach. Ward looked out at the strange universe ahead of them. Then he smiled. Now, he said calmly, we keep the door closed. And the Aurora's lament continued drifting through the silent space between realities, watching, waiting, protecting the galaxy that would never know how close it had come to destruction. And